Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're looking into something pretty interesting, maybe a little bit different, a little bit darker than what we normally cover, but I think you'll find it really fascinating. It's nihilism,
Oh, yeah, a classic.
a classic, right?
Yeah.
So the spiritual seek, they just love to dive into these concepts that seem a little bit negative on the surface.
Right.
But when you really look at them, there's a lot more going on. So the article we're looking at today is called From Darkness to Light, Nihilism's Role in Spiritual Evolution.
Okay.
And they're making the case that nihilism, which is this idea that life is inherently meaningless, might actually be a stepping stone to spiritual growth.
Yeah. It is a bit of a head scratcher at first glance, right? Like, how can something so seemingly bleak and negative actually be a pathway to something like enlightenment? But that's what we're here to explore, right?
Yeah.
To dig into those layers and see what we can uncover.
Exactly. And that's what I love about the spiritual seek is that they're not afraid to tackle those tough questions. They're not afraid to go to those dark places and see what's there.
Yeah, and often what you find is that those dark places actually hold a lot of potential for growth and transformation.
Yeah, totally. So let's start with some basics, just so everyone's on the same page.
Okay.
When we say nihilism, what exactly are we talking about?
The word itself comes from the Latin nihil, which literally means nothing.
Okay.
And I think that really gets to the heart of it. Nihilism is essentially the belief that life is inherently meaningless, that there are no objective truths or values.
So it's like saying everything we think we know about right and wrong, good and evil purpose, meaning all of that, it's just stuff we made up.
Exactly. It's all just a human construct.
Wow. Okay, so where did this whole idea come from? The article mentions that it has a kind of interesting history.
Yeah, it does. It's not something that just popped up out of nowhere.
Right.
Actually, the term nihilism was first used by this German philosopher named Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi back in the early 1800s. And get this, he actually used it as kind of an insult.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was criticizing other philosophers at the time, and he accused them of being nihilists. Basically, he was saying, hey, your ideas are so bad, they lead to this dangerous philosophy of meaninglessness.
Oh, so it was like the ultimate philosophical diss.
Exactly, like your argument is so bad it's practically nihilism.
Oh, that's kind of funny. But then nihilism kind of took on a life of its own right.
Yeah, it did. It really gained traction in 19th century Russia, which was a time of huge social and political upheaval.
Oh, right. Lots of revolutions and unrest and things like that.
Exactly. People were questioning everything, traditional authority, the church societal norms. The whole system was being challenged.
Right.
And nihilism, with its rejection of all established values, offered a kind of framework for this rebellion. It was like saying, if everything we've been told is a lie, then let's just tear it all down and start fresh.
Yeah, I could see how that would be appealing in that kind of environment. It's like a very radical way of looking at the world.
It is. And it's during this time that we get the kind of classic image of the nihilist, the brooding, rebellious figure who rejects everything.
Like the stereotypical angsty teenager?
Yeah, kind of, but with a more philosophical bent.
Right.
The article even mentions Bazarov, the main character from Ivan Turgenev's novel Fathers and Sons.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that book.
He's like the poster boy for 19th century Russian nihilism. He's a scientist. He rejects all tradition and authority.
A real rebel.
Exactly.
So this rebellious energy, how did that solidify into a set of philosophical principles? What are like the core tenets of nihilism, according to the article?
Well, they highlight three main ones: the rejection of societal values, the absence of objective purpose, and the denial of moral truths.
Okay, so basically everything we've built our lives around, all of our morals and values, our sense of purpose, it's all just an illusion.
In a way, yes. Nihilism challenges us to consider that maybe there isn't any inherent meaning or purpose baked into the universe.
So it's like we're all just kind of wandering around in this meaningless void.
Well, that's one way to look at it, and I can see why that would be a pretty bleak outlook for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unsettling to think about it that way.
Yeah.
But the spiritual seek, they always seem to find a silver lining, right?
Yeah.
So what's the upside to all of this? How can nihilism possibly lead to spiritual growth?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's where things start to get really interesting. Well, the article argues that this radical deconstruction, this stripping away of all prepackaged meanings, can actually be incredibly liberating.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. It's like clearing the mental clutter, right? You're getting rid of all those beliefs and assumptions that you've been carrying around, maybe without even realizing it.
Right.
And once you do that, you create space for something new.
So instead of being like a dead end, nihilism can actually be a starting point.
Exactly. It's like a philosophical spring cleaning.
I like that. Okay, so if we're tossing out all those old beliefs and assumptions, what do we replace them with? What becomes the foundation for our lives if nothing is inherently meaningful?
Well, that's where this whole idea of spiritual nihilism comes into play.
Okay, yeah, the article talks about that. What exactly is spiritual nihilism?
It's the idea that the universe itself is inherently meaningless. There's no grand plan, no divine purpose, just this vast, indifferent expanse.
Okay, I can see how that would be terrifying for some people. But isn't it also kind of freeing in a way? Like if there's no preset meaning, then we have the freedom to create our own.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it. It's like saying, hey, the universe isn't going to hand you a purpose on a silver platter.
Right.
You have to go out and create it yourself. And that can be a really empowering realization.
It's like we're not just passive recipients of meaning, but active participants in its creation.
Right. And that's a really cool way to think about our place in the universe.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the philosophy, even this idea of spiritual nihilism. But what about the human side of things? How does embracing these ideas actually affect us emotionally?
Yeah, that's an important question. And it's something that the article doesn't shy away from. You know, facing the void, confronting the potential meaninglessness of existence, it can be a really difficult, even painful experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our brains are wired to seek out patterns and meaning. It's kind of unsettling to think that it might all be an illusion.
Absolutely. And the article talks about how people might cope with these feelings in different ways. Some might turn to rage,
Right.
others to intellectualization, and some might even retreat into depression.
So it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
It's something that can have a real impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
Right, and the spiritual Sikh, they're all about spiritual growth, and they don't sugarcoat that. They acknowledge the potential darkness, but they also suggest that these emotional challenges can actually be part of a larger process.
Okay, interesting. So what is that process?
It's a process of confronting the void in order to reach a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, so it's like leaning into the discomfort, the uncertainty, as a way to grow and evolve.
Exactly. And that's a pretty classic spiritual Sikh move, right?
Totally. Okay, so we've got the origins, the philosophy, the potential emotional roller coaster. But what about how this all shows up in the real world? I'm curious how nihilism manifests in art, literature, pop culture.
Yeah. Well, that's where it gets really fascinating. Nihilism, despite its reputation for being all doom and gloom, has actually had a huge influence on creative expression.
Really? How so? I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive that a philosophy centered around meaninglessness would inspire so much art.
I know, right? But think about writers like Franz Kafka or Samuel Beckett.
Oh, yeah.
Their works are often full of absurdity and alienation and this sense of searching for meaning in a world that seems to offer none.
Right.
And their stories can be pretty bleak, but there's also this raw honesty, this depth of emotion that really resonates with people.
Yeah, it's like by staring into the void, these artists are able to tap into something profoundly human, something about the struggle to find meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to literature either.
Yeah.
The article also talks about how nihilistic themes pop up in movies and TV shows, music, all sorts of creative mediums.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like all those dystopian stories where society has crumbled, or those cynical comedies that poke fun at everything we hold dear.
Exactly. And the spiritual Sikh even suggests that this might be a reflection of the growing anxieties and uncertainties of our times. It's like we're collectively grappling with these big questions about meaning and purpose in a world that feels increasingly complex and chaotic.
Right. It's definitely something to think about.
Okay.
So we've seen how nihilism can inspire creativity, but the spiritual Sikh takes it a step further, right?
Yeah.
They argue that it can actually be a catalyst for spiritual awakening.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. They're saying that nihilism, by forcing us to question everything, creates the conditions for a deeper, more authentic kind of spiritual growth.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but I need a little help connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
How can a philosophy that's all about the absence of inherent meaning lead to something like spiritual enlightenment?
Well, imagine this. You've inherited all these belief systems and values from your family, from society, from religion, without ever really questioning them. You're just kind of going through the motions, living on autopilot.
Right.
And then nihilism comes along and throws a wrench in the works.
It's like hitting the pause button on life and saying, wait a minute, what do I actually believe?
Right. It forces you to confront the possibility that all those prepackaged meanings might not be your truth. So it's a process of stripping away those layers, those external sources of meaning to get to something more fundamental.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like clearing out the mental clutter to make space for something new to grow. But if we're letting go of all those external sources of meaning, what do we replace them with? What becomes the foundation for our lives?
That's where things get really interesting. The spiritual seek suggests that the very act of confronting the void, of acknowledging the potential meaninglessness of existence, can be a source of profound insight and transformation.
Whoa, okay, that sounds like a paradox. How can staring into the abyss lead to enlightenment?
It's like this. When you strip away all the illusions, all the preconceived notions, you're left with a blank slate. And in that emptiness, in that absence of predefined meaning, you have the freedom to create your own.
So it's not that nihilism gives you the answers, but rather that it empowers you to ask the right questions.
Exactly. It's a shift from passively accepting the meanings that are handed to you to actively seeking and creating your own. And that process of seeking, that journey of discovery, can be profoundly enriching both intellectually and spiritually.
It's like nihilism gives you the tools to become the architect of your own meaning. And that's a pretty powerful concept.
It is, and it reminds me of how the spiritual seek always emphasizes personal responsibility and self-discovery. It fits right in with our overall philosophy.
Totally. Now, the article mentions Nietzsche and his ideas about eternal recurrence, the will to power, and the overman. I know those concepts can be a bit daunting, but they seem to offer some guidance on navigating the nihilistic landscape. Can you break them down for us a little bit?
Sure. So imagine living your life again and again, exactly the same way for all eternity. Would you embrace it? Or would you be filled with regret? That's the essence of eternal recurrence. It's a thought experiment to help you examine if you're truly living a life that you value.
Wow, that's intense. Makes you think twice about those late-night Netflix binges. Huh.
Yeah.
But what about the will to power? That sounds a little aggressive.
Yeah, it does. But for Nietzsche, it wasn't about dominating others. It was about self-mastery. It's about pushing yourself to become the best version of yourself, the driving force behind creativity and self-actualization.
Okay, so more like willpower than like power over other people.
Exactly. And then there's the overman, which is kind of like Nietzsche's ideal human.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, it's someone who transcends conventional morality, creates their own values, and embraces life in all its complexity. It's about pushing past limitations and striving for something truly exceptional.
Okay, so it's like a aspirational figure, someone who's really living life to the fullest on their own terms.
Exactly.
Okay, so Nietzsche's philosophy provides some tools, but what about practical advice for navigating the darkness of nihilism? I mean, not everyone's ready to embrace eternal recurrence or become an overman.
Right. And the spiritual seek acknowledges that they emphasize finding meaning in the everyday. It's not about grand gestures or achieving some kind of ultimate enlightenment. It's about those small moments of joy, connecting with others, pursuing your passions, being present in each moment.
That's something I think we can all relate to, the idea that even if the universe doesn't have a predefined purpose for you, your life can still be incredibly meaningful.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your existence and choosing to find meaning in the face of absurdity.
So by embracing nihilism's truth, we can actually liberate ourselves to create our own meaning. It's almost like the universe is challenging us to step up and become the authors of our own stories.
It's a great way to put it. And that brings us to another interesting point, how nihilistic thinking has influenced other philosophical and cultural movements.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The article mentions positive nihilism.
Yeah.
Which sounds a little contradictory, doesn't it? How can nihilism be positive?
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive. But positive nihilism takes the core tenets of nihilism, the rejection of inherent meaning and objective truth, and uses them as fuel for personal growth and societal change.
So instead of despair, it's a call to action.
Exactly. It's like saying, okay, so there's no inherent meaning. Fine. Let's create something better. Let's build a world that's more compassionate, more in line with our values.
That's a powerful idea. It's like taking the potential energy of nihilism and channeling it into something constructive.
Mm-hmm. And the article highlights another fascinating paradox, the paradox of nihilistic creation. Despite its reputation for negativity, nihilism has actually inspired countless creative works and movements.
Oh, totally. Like everything from existentialism to postmodernism has grappled with the same questions about meaning and purpose that nihilism raises.
Exactly. It's like this philosophy that seemingly denies meaning ends up being a wellspring of creativity, which again speaks to the idea that deconstruction can be a necessary step in the creative process.
It's like you have to break things down in order to build something new and better.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. History, philosophy, psychology, culture, even spiritual growth. What's the takeaway? What does the spiritual seek want us to understand about nihilism's role in our lives?
I think the key message is that nihilism, while seemingly bleak, can actually be a powerful tool for introspection and growth.
Okay.
It challenges us to confront our deepest assumptions about the world and potentially build a more authentic and meaningful existence on the other side.
It's like a crucible, right?
Yeah.
It puts us through burns away all the impurities, and what emerges is something stronger and more refined.
Exactly. And even if we don't fully embrace all of nihilism's tenets, engaging with its ideas can help us examine our own beliefs and values more critically, to question the things we take for granted, and ultimately to live more consciously and deliberately.
And that's a valuable lesson, no matter what your personal beliefs are. Okay, so how does the spiritual seek wrap up this whole exploration of nihilism? What's their final message to the reader?
Well, in classic spiritual seek fashion, they end with a little challenge. They include a mini quiz called Are You a Nihilist? That asks you to reflect on some pretty deep questions about your worldview.
Oh, a quiz. I always love a good quiz.
Yeah.
What kind of questions does it ask?
Things like, do you believe in a higher power? Do you think human achievements have any lasting significance in the grand scheme of things? Questions that really make you think about how you find meaning in life.
So it's not about judging whether nihilism is right or wrong, but using it as a lens for self-discovery.
Exactly. The spiritual seek is suggesting that nihilism, whether you agree with it or not, can be a valuable tool for spiritual exploration. It can help you identify your core values, confront your fears, and create a life that is more aligned with your true self.
I love that. It's like they're saying, hey, here's this potentially unsettling idea. Now go play with it and see what you discover about yourself.
Exactly. And that's what makes this article and this whole deep dive so fascinating. It's not about giving you answers, but about empowering you to ask better questions.
And that's what we're all about here, right? Giving you something to think about, to chew on, maybe even to challenge some of those long-held beliefs.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our exploration of nihilism, I'm curious, if you had to take that Are You a Nihilist quiz, what do you think your answers would reveal about your own worldview? How do you find meaning in life?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's something to really sit with.
It is.
And I think it's so cool that the spiritual seek, they offer that. You know, they don't just present these ideas and then leave you hanging. They give you something to actually do with them. Some way to apply them to your own life.
Yeah, they're all about giving you the tools to explore your own beliefs and to find your own path.
Totally. So to kind of sum up our deep dive today, we've looked at nihilism from all these different angles. The history, the philosophy, the psychological impact, how it shows up in culture, and even its potential as a catalyst for spiritual growth. And what's so fascinating is that we've seen how it can be both destructive and creative, terrifying, and liberating.
Right. It's a philosophy that really forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about existence, to grapple with the uncertainty of it all. But it also offers this incredible opportunity, the opportunity to create our own meaning, to forge our own path.
And become the authors of our own lives, as they say.
Exactly.
But that's a message that resonates really deeply, regardless of your spiritual beliefs or your philosophical leanings.
It's a universal human experience.
It is. We're all kind of standing on the edge of this vast unknown universe. And nihilism is saying, hey, there's no map, there's no guidebook, there's no predetermined destination.
You get to choose your own adventure.
Exactly. And it's both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
It is. But I think ultimately it's incredibly empowering.
Yeah, I agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive into nihilism, I want to leave you with this thought. What will you create?